Hi, I'm Ryan Douglas, the teaching pastor here at the 456. Thanks so much for joining us for our community gathering video this week as we are three sermons into our series, God the King. And what we want to talk about today, or what we did talk about this past Sunday, is that we are to live for the glory of the King. That was our sermon title, For the Glory of the King. And we talked about how our lives are best spent for the glory of God. In fact, our theology this past week was God is worthy of all glory. And I think that that's something that we probably know on an intellectual level. It's probably something we comprehend and understand on an intellectual level, but maybe it has a difficult time becoming practice for us. One of the verses we looked at this past week was Psalm 115, which says, "Not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name be the glory and honor." And so when we talk about that, when we talk about living for the glory of God, or we look at the book of John and how everything that Jesus did, he did only what he saw the Father doing, only said what he heard the Father saying. Even going to the cross in John chapter 12, Jesus says that, Father, glorify your name, that the purpose of the cross was for the glory of God. You'll remember also that at the very end of John, when Jesus is about to ascend into heaven, he has a conversation with Peter. And he tells Peter, this is the kind of death by which you're going to glorify me. And so there's this idea that God is worthy. It's not just an idea, it's truth, but this concept of understanding that God is worthy of all glory. And that because he is the highest thing, because he is the most holy, because he is God, and therefore bigger and better than everything else, that all glory should uniformly be directed to him. And so when we think about God being worthy of all glory, what it should do is it bring us to our application that we talked about this past week, that our lives are best spent for the glory of God. And when we think about our lives being spent, you'll remember the story that we looked at this past Sunday, and that was of three of David's mighty men. So David had a group of mighty men who God used in tremendous ways to bring about victory in battle. They did some really amazing things. But one of my favorite stories is of these three mighty men. They're sitting around with David the king, and David says, "Man, I'm thirsty. I miss the water from the well of Bethlehem." And if you remember, David was born in Bethlehem, raised in Bethlehem. And so he's like, "Man, I miss the water from the well in Bethlehem." If you've ever traveled outside of the West Texas, I grew up in Midland. Most of us here are in the San Angelo area, and our water is just not great around here. And I remember going up to visit my grandparents in Oregon every summer and drinking water straight from the tap and thinking, wow, this tastes way different than the water I grew up drinking. And I don't know if where David was, at this point was kind of like San Angelo water or Midland water, but he is longing for the water from Bethlehem. There was a big difference there. And so he makes this passing statement. The king makes this passing statement that he longs for the water of the well in Bethlehem. And these three mighty men, at the risk of their lives, charge through the Philistine defenses to get water, a pot of water from this well, and then come back through the Philistine defenses and bring David this water. And I just think, man, these guys loved their king. They loved their king a lot. And David was just an earthly king. I mean, his kingdom came and it saw an end after about 40 years, and then his son became king, and then his son after him. And so David was still just a man. Yes, he was a man after God's own heart. Yes, he was the king that God had anointed and picked to be the king, but he's still at the end of the day just a man. And there were people who were so allegiant to him that when they see the desire of the king, they, at risk of their own lives, go to carry out that desire. And I just wonder a lot of times about myself, do I have that kind of passion for my king? Do I have that kind of concern and that kind of just kind of vigor, if you will, for my King God? That when I see who God is, what he's declared, the kind of things that he desires, do I have the kind of mindset that I said, look, whether for life or death, I'll go with you wherever you go. Kind of like Ittai the Gittite from a couple of weeks ago. Do we have such a passion for God that we would say, look, use my life, spend my life for your glory? It reminds me of a text right after Paul became a believer in Acts chapter 9. So he'd been formerly known as Saul. He's Paul. He's this believer, and God, when he's still blind, God sends a prophet to him to go and speak to him, and he says, look, I need you to tell Paul how much he's going to have to suffer for my name's sake. And Paul suffered a lot for the sake of Christ and for the sake of God. And I just wonder, are we in love enough with our King that not only would we willingly suffer for him, but it's not all the time that we're going to be called to suffer for God, but would we just make choices for the intent and for the purpose of glorifying God? In the way we raise our kids, in the way we handle ourselves in marriage, would our intent and our purpose be, I want to glorify my God the King in this. And so our prayer this past week was an obvious one, and it was, God, give us a passion for your glory. God, give us a desire for your glory. Bring us to the place where our heartbeat really is that text from Psalm 115, not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name be the glory. That at the end of the day, the choices we're making aren't for our own accolade. They aren't for our recognition. They aren't so that we can get pats on the back or that we can get kudos, but they are for the sake of the King being rightly glorified, that we would turn all attention and all affection to our King. And so 3 questions to consider. First question is, what does culture tend to push as the highest goal or the highest glory? What is it that culture tends to kind of emphasize as the thing that's most important? You know, like one of the things that you hear about a lot in literature and movies and television. I don't know honestly that I've heard about it a lot in just individual conversation, but this idea of kind of the American dream, the house, the white picket fence, or pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, making a name for yourself. Are those the kinds of things? What are the kinds of things that culture tends to hold up as the highest goal or the highest glory? Question 2, what sorts of things were you taught to pursue in terms of ambition or goals? What were the kinds of things that you were taught to pursue? For me, it was good grades. You get good grades, you go to church, you read your Bible. These were some of the things that I was kind of taught as like, you don't have sex before marriage, you don't go to the parties. Like these were kind of some of the highest goals. If you could be a straight A student, if you could go to church, don't sleep with your girlfriend, then man, you've achieved it. Like that was it. You know, that was kind of the apex. Like what were some of the things that you were taught kind of as standards for life and for living? What were some things that you kind of maybe brought from your childhood into your adult years, or maybe they were things that were formed later in you in college as you kind of began to stand on your own 2 feet? What were some things that were kind of taught to you as an instructional, foundational kind of goals? And then finally, the third question is this: what sort of things may keep us personally from living for the glory of God? What sort of things may keep us from personally living for the glory of God? And I want you to be as specific as you can here. So don't just in fact, let me say the question differently. What sort of things may keep you personally from living for the glory of God? So think in your answer here, think in terms of you personally, in your work, your family, your life. What are some things that you can perceive as things that may be in the way of you living for the glory of God? And spend a little bit of time discussing that tonight. And then what do we do about it? How do we overcome those things and make the glory of God a higher goal? And so thanks so much for tuning in this week. We're so glad that you're with us and that you're part of our church family and that you're part of our community. We love you guys, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye.